Millionaire lets a beggar live in his mansion and is shocked upon arriving at his mansion unexpectedly. Bruno Alves was a 30-year-old millionaire, but despite having everything money could buy, he felt deeply alone. He had inherited a huge fortune when he was just 20 years old after his parents tragically died in an accident. Even though he lived in a luxurious villa outside Munich, surrounded by servants and wealth, nothing seemed to fill the emptiness in his heart. One day, while driving through the city in his sports car, Bruno noticed an elderly woman digging through a trash can. She looked tired and frail. Bruno felt a wave of compassion. Without hesitation, he pulled over and walked up to her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Is there anything I can do to help you?" he asked kindly. The woman, initially suspicious, hesitated. But something in Bruno's eyes made her feel she could trust him. With a trembling voice, she said, "My name is Gertrude. I've been living on the streets for months since I lost my apartment. I have no one left." Bruno's heart ached as he heard her story, and without a second thought, he offered her a place to stay. "I have a garage I don't use. You can stay there until you find something better," he said. Gertrude was speechless at Bruno's generosity. With tears in her eyes, she accepted the offer. When they arrived at Bruno's villa, he showed her the garage, which was bigger than any place she had ever lived in. It had a comfortable bed, a small bathroom, and a basic kitchen. Gertrude couldn't believe her luck. Over the next few days, Bruno and Gertrude got to know each other better. He learned that she had once been a talented artist, but life's hardships had forced her to give up her passion. Gertrude, in turn, realized that behind Bruno's image of a lonely, wealthy young man, there was a kind and caring heart. Gertrude's presence began to fill the emptiness Bruno had felt for so long. She taught him to appreciate the simple things, like a sunset or a hot cup of coffee on a quiet morning. Bruno, in return, gave Gertrude the security and affection she had been missing for so long. Though their friendship grew, Gertrude remained reserved about her past, and Bruno decided not to push her, knowing she would share her story when she was ready. And so, in the garage of a luxurious villa, an unlikely friendship blossomed between a lonely young millionaire and a homeless elderly woman. Together, they found the missing piece in each other's lives and were ready to face whatever challenges might come. Even though Bruno and Gertrude were years apart in age, they found common ground in their love for art and music. They would spend hours talking about their favorite painters and composers, and Bruno was amazed by how much Gertrude knew and her rich life experiences. One day, as they were having tea in the garden, Gertrude casually mentioned that her birthday was coming up. Bruno realized that he didn't know much about her past, and saw this as a chance to learn more. "Gertrude, I know you don't like to talk much about the past, but I'd love to hear more about your life before we met," Bruno asked gently. She looked down and stayed quiet for a moment, and Bruno could tell that she was struggling with her feelings. He wondered if he had asked the wrong thing. Finally, Gertrude looked up with a shaky voice and said, "My life before meeting you was complicated. I had to make some tough choices and face things I never thought I would. But that's all in the past, and I'd rather not dig into it." Bruno nodded understandingly. "I get it, Gertrude. If you don't want to talk about it, that's okay. I just want you to know that I'm here for you no matter what. You're an amazing person, and you deserve to be happy." Gertrude smiled warmly and squeezed Bruno's hand. "Thank you, Bruno. You're such a good friend, and I appreciate everything you've done for me. Maybe one day I'll be ready to tell you my story. But for now, let's just enjoy the present." Bruno smiled back, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Take all the time you need, Gertrude. I'll be here whenever you're ready." From that moment, Bruno decided he would make Gertrude's birthday something really special. He spent days planning a surprise party, decorating the garage with balloons and streamers, and cooking her favorite meals. He even tracked down some of Gertrude's old friends through his connections. On the day of her birthday, Bruno took Gertrude for a drive around the city to keep her distracted while the final touches were being made. When they returned to the villa, Gertrude was speechless. With tears in her eyes, she saw the surprise party Bruno had organized. She hugged him tightly and said, "No one has ever done something like this for me. You're an angel, Bruno." Bruno smiled and hugged her back. "You're the angel, Gertrude. You filled my life with light and joy, and I wanted to show you just how much you mean to me." Surrounded by friends and loved ones, Bruno and Gertrude celebrated her birthday with laughter, dancing, and delicious food. For the first time in a long while, Gertrude felt truly loved and appreciated. As the party continued, Bruno couldn't help but think about the secret Gertrude was keeping about her past. He knew it must be something important, but he also knew she would tell him when she was ready. It was a peaceful morning in Bruno's town. Gertrude had gotten up early, as usual, and was making breakfast in their garage. Bruno, still tired from a long week of work, decided to sleep in a bit longer. As Gertrude cooked, she hummed a tune that Bruno recognized, but she seemed lost in thought, her mind far away. Bruno watched her for a moment, curious, but chose not to interrupt her. After they shared some coffee in the garden, Bruno excused himself, saying he had some urgent things to take care of in his office. Left alone, Gertrude felt it was finally time to do something she'd been putting off for a while. Carefully, she pulled out an old worn suitcase from under the bed. With trembling hands, she opened it and took out a sketchbook and some pencils. She hadn't touched them in years. Sitting on the garage floor, Gertrude began to draw. At first, her strokes were shaky, hesitant, like she'd forgotten how to let the lines flow. But soon, she regained her confidence. She sketched landscapes from her childhood, faces of people she once knew, and scenes that seemed to spring from her imagination. So lost in her work, she didn't even notice when Bruno walked into the garage. He stood there, quietly watching her, amazed. He had never seen her so focused, so absorbed in something. The way she brought her emotions to life on the paper left him in awe. Suddenly, Gertrude looked up and met Bruno's gaze. For a moment, she froze, as if she'd been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. But when she saw the smile on his face, she relaxed and gave him a shy grin. "I'm sorry, Bruno. I didn't want you to see me like this," she said, a bit embarrassed. "Are you kidding?" Bruno replied with a wide smile. "I had no idea you could draw like this. You're amazing, Gertrude." She blushed, glancing at the drawings scattered on the floor. "Thanks. It's been so long since I've drawn, but I guess now felt like the right time to pick it up again." Bruno sat down beside her, picking up one of the sketches. "These are beautiful, Gertrude. Why did you stop?" Gertrude sighed, clearly wrestling with some deep emotion, and went quiet. Bruno waited, wondering if she would finally open up. After a moment, she took a deep breath and said softly, "I had to leave a lot behind when my life changed. Drawing was one of those things. But now, being here with you, I feel like I can be myself again." Bruno, with a warm smile, gently held Gertrude's hand and looked at her with care. "I'm so glad to hear that. I want you to know that I'll be here to support you in everything you want to do." Gertrude returned his smile and squeezed his hand tenderly. "Thank you, Bruno. You're such a wonderful friend." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over everything, they spent the afternoon discussing art and sharing stories from their lives. Bruno recounted his childhood, describing how he found solace in music and painting during tough times. He painted vivid pictures with his words of how melodies and colors became his faithful companions. Gertrude, in turn, spoke with enthusiasm about the intriguing places she had visited and the fascinating people she had met. She described bustling city streets in far-off lands and deep conversations with artists from around the globe. Even though their friendship was growing stronger, Gertrude still kept some secrets about her past. Bruno sensed there was something she wasn't revealing, but he chose to respect her silence and wait patiently. He was simply happy to be in her company and to support her. Little did Bruno know, he was about to uncover a surprising truth about Gertrude's past in an unexpected way. After discovering Gertrude's artistic talent, Bruno couldn't stop thinking about how to help rekindle her passion. He knew she had given up many things in her life and wanted to do everything he could to help her feel fulfilled and happy again. Determined, Bruno dove into researching Gertrude's past, using every contact and resource he had. He scoured city archives and the internet for information. What he discovered left him speechless. At the height of her career, Gertrude had been a renowned painter, with exhibitions in some of the country's most prestigious galleries. Her work was celebrated by critics and collectors alike, and she was considered a rising star in the art world. Yet, more than 20 years ago, she suddenly vanished from the art scene without a trace. Some speculated she had faced serious personal issues, while others thought she simply lost interest in painting. Bruno was utterly captivated by her story and was determined to find answers. He prepared himself to talk to Gertrude about his findings. One peaceful afternoon, while they were enjoying tea in the garden, Bruno gathered his courage and gently broached the subject. "Gertrude, there's something important I'd like to ask you," he said softly, as the aroma of tea and the songs of birds created a serene backdrop around them. Bruno looked at Gertrude with curiosity and said, "I found out that you were a very famous painter when you were younger. What happened that made you stop painting?" Gertrude went silent for a moment, gazing into the distance. Bruno could see she was struggling with her emotions and wondered if bringing up the topic had been a good idea. Finally, Gertrude sighed and said with a sad tone, "It's a long story, Bruno, one I've tried to forget for many years." Bruno gently took her hand and said, "I understand if you don't want to talk about it now, Gertrude, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. If you ever want to share your story, I'd be happy to listen." Gertrude smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Bruno. You're a good friend. Maybe someday I'll have the courage to tell you everything, but for now, I'd rather focus on the present." Bruno nodded in understanding. "Take all the time you need, Gertrude, but I want you to know that I believe in your talent and want to help you rediscover your passion for painting. If you'll let me, I'd love to support you in shining as an artist." Gertrude's eyes filled with tears. "Would you really do that for me, Bruno, after everything?" Bruno smiled and replied, "Of course, Gertrude. You're an amazing person and you deserve the chance to do what you love. Please let me help you." Gertrude moved, nodded. "All right, Bruno, I accept your help, but I want you to know it won't be easy. It's been many years since I last painted, and I'm not sure I can still do it." Bruno squeezed her hand affectionately. "Don't worry, Gertrude. We'll take it one step at a time. The important thing is that you try." Gertrude smiled and hugged Bruno with gratitude. "Thank you, Bruno. You have no idea how much it means to me that you believe in me." From that moment on, Bruno devoted himself to helping Gertrude rediscover her passion for painting. He bought materials, brushes, and paints, and set up a special studio for her in the villa. Gertrude spent hours in the studio, painting and drawing like she hadn't done in years. At first, her lines were shaky and unsure, but gradually she regained her confidence. Bruno watched silently, impressed by her talent and dedication. He knew Gertrude had a long road ahead, but he was ready to walk with her every step of the way. Soon, people became interested in Gertrude's new works and asked if she would be willing to participate in a local exhibition. Gertrude was speechless. It had been years since she had publicly shown her work, and the idea of doing so again filled her with excitement. Gertrude felt both scared and excited. "I don't know," she said with a trembling voice. "It's been so long since I showed my work. What if people don't like it? What if I'm not good enough?" Bruno came close and hugged her warmly. "Gertrude, you're an amazing artist. Your work is beautiful and moving. I'm sure people will love it, and if they don't, the most important thing is that you're happy with what you're doing." Gertrude smiled and wiped away her tears. "You're right, Bruno. I've hidden my talent for too long. It's time to shine again. I'm going to participate in the exhibition." Bruno smiled with enthusiasm. "Great. I'm sure it will be a success. Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of all the details. Just focus on creating your masterpieces." In the following weeks, Gertrude threw herself into preparing her paintings for the exhibition. She spent hours in the studio, painting and perfecting every detail. Bruno supported her in every way, bringing her food and drinks when she forgot to eat and cheering her on when she felt like she couldn't continue. Finally, the day of the exhibition arrived. Gertrude was nervous but also excited. She knew she was about to face her past and her fears, but she also knew she had Bruno's unwavering support. When they arrived at the gallery, Gertrude was breathless at the sight of the crowd. Art critics, collectors, and art lovers walking around admiring the displayed works. Gertrude approached her section where the paintings were hung, and to her surprise, a large group of people had gathered around her works, engaging in lively discussions and comments. "They're incredible," she heard a woman say. "The way you capture light and movement is just amazing," added a man. "The emotion you convey through colors and shapes is like you can feel what the artist felt while painting." Gertrude felt tears welling up in her eyes. After so many years of doubt and fear, she was finally receiving the recognition she deserved. Bruno came up and hugged her proudly. "You did it, Gertrude. You're shining like a star." Gertrude smiled and hugged him back. "Thank you, Bruno. None of this would have been possible without you." But just when Gertrude thought everything was perfect, a man with a surprised look approached her. "Gertrude?" the man asked. "It's me, Ernest. Don't you remember? We were art school classmates years ago." Gertrude froze when she saw Ernest. He had been one of her closest friends in her youth, but he had also witnessed some of the darkest moments of her life. Seeing him now, unexpectedly, was both a shock and a challenge. "Gertrude," Ernest began with a nervous smile, "I know it's been ages since we last met. When I saw your name on the list of artists, I had to come and see you. We have a lot to talk about." Gertrude glanced at Bruno, who stood by her side, his concern evident. She knew that Ernest held information about her past that could jeopardize everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The exhibition had been a tremendous success. Her paintings received rave reviews, and many sold for high prices. Yet, despite her triumph, Gertrude couldn't shake the worry about Ernest and the potential trouble his knowledge might bring. Bruno, noticing Gertrude's anxiety, made a decision. "Let's invite Ernest for dinner at the villa. That way, we can discuss things in a more peaceful and private setting." Gertrude was nervous but understood that she needed to confront her past head-on. During dinner, Ernest began to share details about his life after art school. He had become an art critic for several major magazines and newspapers, closely following Gertrude's career before her sudden disappearance. "I always knew you had a special talent," Ernest said with admiration. "Your work was truly unique and moving. I was sure you'd make a significant impact in the art world." Gertrude smiled, though her expression was tinged with sadness. "Thank you, Ernest. But as you know, things didn't turn out the way I had hoped." Ernest nodded, understanding her pain. "I know, and I've always wondered what happened when you vanished. Many people thought you had a nervous breakdown or something like that." Gertrude looked down, her voice trembling. "It wasn't a nervous breakdown, Ernest. It was something far more complex." Bruno, offering support, gently took Gertrude's hand. "If you don't want to talk about it, we understand. You don't have to share anything you're not ready to." But Gertrude shook her head resolutely. "No, Bruno. It's time I face my past and tell everything." So, Gertrude began to reveal the truth about her disappearance. More than 20 years ago, she had met an art collector named Richard. Richard had charmed her with his deep knowledge of the art world. However, what Gertrude didn't know was that Richard was involved in shady dealings and was using their relationship to sell counterfeit artworks to unsuspecting collectors. When Gertrude discovered the truth, she confronted Richard and threatened to report him to the authorities. But Richard, rather than backing down, became even more menacing. Richard was unwilling to lose his business and decided to take drastic measures one night while Gertrude slept peacefully. In a fit of uncontrolled rage, he broke into her apartment and attacked her brutally. Although Gertrude managed to escape, the trauma and fear forced her into hiding. Ever since, she lived in constant fear that Richard might find her and finish what he had started. Her story, filled with horror and compassion, left everyone stunned. How could someone so kind and talented have suffered such cruelty? When Ernest and Bruno learned of Gertrude's suffering, they were deeply moved and supportive. With tears in his eyes, Ernest said, "Gertrude, I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I want you to know that I'm here to support you in whatever you need." Bruno, also touched, added, "No one will hurt you, Gertrude. I would protect you with my life if necessary." Gertrude, hearing these words, smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Ernest. You have no idea how much your support means to me right now." But just when it seemed like things were starting to get better, Ernest dropped a bombshell that froze Gertrude's blood. "There's one more thing you need to know. Richard is in the city, and he seems to be looking for you." Panic overtook Gertrude. After so many years of running, Her worst nightmare was about to come true. What would Richard do if he found her? How could she face him after everything she had been through? The news of Richard being in the city left Gertrude in shock. After years of evading her past, the danger seemed finally imminent. Seeing the fear in Gertrude's eyes, Bruno decided to take matters into his own hands. He hired a security team to monitor the villa 24/7 and made sure Gertrude was never alone. Yet despite the stringent security measures, Gertrude couldn't shake the feeling that Richard was drawing closer. Her nightmares about Richard plagued her in the dark, and her nights were disturbed by screams and anxiety. Bruno would wake up in the middle of the night to comfort her, trying to offer some semblance of calm and security. He knew that to end Gertrude's fear once and for all, he would have to confront Richard. The decision was made. Someday they would have to face this threat head-on. While Gertrude was working in her studio, Bruno received an urgent call from Ernest. Ernest had discovered that Richard, an old adversary, was planning to attend a major art auction in town. Richard was allegedly selling one of the fake artworks he had created years ago. Bruno immediately knew what had to be done. Determined, Bruno decided to take Gertrude and Ernest to the auction to confront Richard publicly. When they arrived, Gertrude was trembling with fear. She knew Richard would be there and couldn't imagine how he would react after all these years. But Bruno and Ernest were by her side, giving her the strength she needed. Inside the auction hall, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Finally, Richard walked in. He looked as stylish and charming as ever, but when he saw Gertrude, his expression changed completely. His eyes filled with anger and contempt as he approached her with deliberate steps. "Well, look who decided to show up after all these years," Richard mocked. "The great artist Gertrude, who vanished without a trace. What brings you here, darling? Came to apologize?" Gertrude felt a knot in her stomach but stood her ground. "No, Richard, I'm here to confront you and make you pay for everything you've done, not just to me, but to everyone you deceived with your fake artworks." Richard laughed scornfully. "I'm sorry, Gertrude, but you don't understand. I did you a favor by taking you out of the art world. You were too naive and weak to survive here. You should be grateful." But Bruno couldn't hold back any longer. He stepped forward and stared at Richard defiantly. "Listen up, Richard. Gertrude is one of the strongest and bravest people I know. She's been through things you can't even imagine and survived. Never underestimate her again." Richard looked at Bruno with disdain. "And you, who are you? Her new boyfriend? Don't make me laugh. Gertrude has always been a loser and always will be, no matter how many men defend her." Then Ernest stepped in. "You're completely wrong, Richard. Gertrude is a talented artist and a wonderful person. Today, in front of everyone here, we're going to expose your lies and deceptions." Ernest pulled out a folder full of documents and photos and began showing them to the crowd. They were proof of the fake artworks Richard had sold and the fraudulent methods he had used to deceive collectors and museums. Richard turned pale upon seeing the evidence, but tried to keep his composure. "This is a lie. I never forged anything." Richard was cornered and couldn't escape the accusations. People in the room began shouting that he was a fraud and demanded their stolen money back. Richard tried to run, but the security guard stopped him, and soon after, the police arrived to take him away. Gertrude felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders as she saw Richard being arrested. For the first time in many years, she could breathe freely. Bruno hugged her tightly and whispered in her ear, "You did it. You faced your worst nightmare and came out victorious. I'm so proud of you." Gertrude smiled through her tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Bruno. You gave me the strength I needed to face my past. Thank you for believing in me." Ernest came over and hugged her too. "I'm glad to have been part of this. Gertrude, I always knew you were a special person, and today you proved it once again." Gertrude hugged her friends tightly. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Bruno and Ernest by her side, she felt ready to face anything. With a heart full of hope and love, she took the first step towards a new life, free of fears and lies, where she could shine with all her talent and never be alone again. After Richard's arrest, Gertrude felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. For the first time in many years, she could think about the future without fear. Bruno and Ernest were by her side the whole time, supporting and encouraging her. Together, they began planning the next step in Gertrude's life, finding her daughter. Gertrude had lost touch with her daughter after fleeing from Richard, leaving her in the care of a friend. With Bruno's help and his contacts, Gertrude had a chance to find her daughter and reconnect after so many years. The search was not easy. It had been over 20 years since Gertrude had last seen her daughter, and she had no idea where she might be now. But Bruno didn't give up. He hired a team of private detectives to follow every possible lead and spent hours sifting through files and records. Finally, after several weeks of searching, Bruno received a call that took his breath away. One of the investigators had found Gertrude's daughter living in a small town a few hours away. Bruno rushed to bring the news to Gertrude, who could hardly believe what she was hearing. After so many years of uncertainty and pain, Gertrude and Bruno were finally about to see Gertrude's daughter again. They traveled to a small, quiet town surrounded by mountains and forests. When they arrived at the address they had, Gertrude's heart was racing. She was nervous, wondering how her daughter would react after all these years, and if she would forgive her for being away. Bruno held Gertrude's hand and said reassuringly, "Everything will be all right. Your daughter loves you, and I'm sure she'll be thrilled to see you." With her heart pounding, Gertrude knocked on the door. The seconds felt like hours, but finally the door opened. There, standing in front of her, was her daughter. She had grown into a beautiful woman, and Gertrude recognized her immediately. Did you like today's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with your friends. See you in the next video.